The Citadel of War orbited a dying red dwarf like a crown of iron teeth. Its hull was scarred by centuries of training exercises, bombardment simulations, and ceremonial duels. Inside, the halls throbbed with alien voices, cadets of every conceivable shape and species learning to become soldiers of the Galactic Accord. Captain Elias Veyra walked those halls in silence, his boots echoing against metal designed for feet much larger than his. He felt every gaze. The aliens didn't bother to hide their curiosity or their disdain. "Human," one whispered in a voice like rusted chains scraping. "Fragile," another said, mandibles clicking in amusement. "Story spinners, not fighters." Elias ignored them. His face carried old scars, one running down from temple to jaw, another slashing across his neck. He had worn no medals, no decorations, only the black uniform of a veteran who had survived campaigns others hadn't. The amphitheater waited ahead, vast enough to seat 10,000. Today's lesson, comparative military history. Cadets from 20 worlds sat in curved rows, armor gleaming, eyes sharp with expectation. The vaulted ceiling projected ancient battles, holograms of beasts and soldiers frozen in eternal combat. At the center stood General Catharn Veylox, towering reptilian commander of the Citadel. His scales shone like hammered bronze, each plate polished, each gesture carved from discipline. He had served for 2 centuries and commanded fleets humans could barely dream of. "Today," Catharn's voice thundered, "we compare the warrior traditions of our peoples. Each species shall share their legends, the myths that shape their soldiers. Cadets, you will learn not just weapons, but the minds that wield them." One by one, species presented their myths. A feline warrior told of her people's moon hunts, when ancestral predators fought under twin suns until only the strongest pride survived. A crystalline being described the siege of Asphalt, when its ancestors stood against volcanic eruptions as living fortresses. Each tale was brutal, proud, heavy with alien triumph. Then came the human myths. A cadet from the avian clans, feathers rippling with disdain, projected Earth stories. Holograms bloomed, a man wrestling lions bare-handed, a soldier holding a pass against thousands, a trickster stealing fire from the gods. The hall shook with laughter. They battled monsters that do not exist. One insectoid cadet cackled. "A single human halting an army? Absurd," hissed a scaled warrior. "Your species worshipped liars," the avian cadet jeered. "You mistook fables for truth." Their laughter rolled like a storm, echoing against steel walls. Elias remained still, his hands behind his back. He had expected this. General Catharn raised one clawed hand, silencing the chamber. His golden eyes turned toward Elias, narrowing. "Captain Veyra, your species has always clung to stories, myths, legends. Yet when tested in real war, your people bleed faster than most. Tell us then, what value have these human fictions? Why should cadets waste breath on tales of men who fought shadows?" Every eye turned to him. The amphitheater grew still. Elias stepped forward, voice even. "You call them fictions. To us, they are memories written in fire." The laughter dimmed, curiosity prickling through scorn. Elias gestured to the holograms still hanging in the air. The warrior with the shield at Thermopylae, the bound titan punished for giving fire to mortals, the soldier standing alone against endless foes. "These are not lies," Elias said. "They are truths sharpened into stories. When my ancestors fought, when they bled, when they survived impossible odds, they carved their lessons into myth, not to entertain, to endure." A cadet hissed. "Endure? What can a frail creature endure?" Elias's gaze cut to him. "Everything," murmurs rippled. Catharn tilted his head, intrigued but skeptical. "You claim these tales are truths. Then explain, Captain. Explain why your kind must wrap truth in fantasy. Why not record battles as we do, with clarity, with numbers, with names?" Elias's jaw tightened. The scars on his neck burned with memory. "Because numbers fade, names are forgotten, but a story lives, carried from one generation to the next. When the fire guttered low, when cold and hunger nearly killed us, it was not numbers that kept us alive. It was stories that taught us how to survive. He let the silence linger. The cadets leaned in despite themselves. Elias stepped closer to the projection of Thermopylae. The tiny figures of 300 men stood in a pass against an army so vast it blurred into infinity. This was not fantasy, it was a truth distilled. A handful of warriors held against the impossible, not because they were strongest, but because they chose not to bend. The story outlived them. It told every child of Earth, when odds overwhelm you, do not run, stand, hold, make your enemy pay for every step. The avian cadet scoffed. A fairy tale. No army is stopped by so few. Elias turned his eyes to him, voice cold. I have seen it done, with my own blood among theirs. The chamber fell silent. Catharn's eyes narrowed further. Are you saying these myths are manuals for war? Elias nodded. Lessons, warnings, instructions. My people were not born with claws or scales. We were born fragile, prey to predators larger and faster. But we learned. Every story, every myth, was a weapon carved from weakness. We taught ourselves how to face what should kill us. A cadet of molten stone rumbled in disbelief. But to clothe instruction in lies, it is not lies, Elias cut him off. His voice rose, not in volume, but in weight. It is memory. When my people stood in the dark, we spoke of fire stolen from gods. When we faced beasts, we told of hunters who struck them down. When we faced endless armies, we remembered men who stood at narrow passes. These myths were never meant to entertain. They were meant to remind us, survival is bought, never gifted. He let his words hang in the air like the edge of a blade. The amphitheater's mood shifted. The laughter had drained, leaving silence heavy as stone. General Catharn studied him, unreadable. At last, he bared sharp teeth in what might have been a grin or a challenge. Then prove it, Catharn said. Show us that your myths are not air. Show us that they are forged of the same iron as war itself. Elias met his gaze without flinching. I will, but not with words alone. When the time comes, you will see the truth in the way we fight and in the way we endure. The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. None laughed now. The projections faded. The chamber dimmed to silence. Elias stood alone at its center, a scarred human among giants, his voice the only echo. And though they mocked no longer, the weight of their doubt pressed against him like gravity. He welcomed it, for he knew the moment would come when their doubt would break. The amphitheater's lights dimmed to a low red glow. The galaxy beyond the viewing ports a sea of cold stars. The cadets no longer laughed. Their bodies, scaled, feathered, crystalline, armored, shifted with unease. General Catharn loomed over Captain Elias Veyra, arms folded, his reptilian face unreadable. You have their attention, the general said, voice deep and edged with challenge. Now show them truth. Speak of these. Instructions hidden in fantasy. Convince us. Elias let the silence linger. He saw cadets watching him with sharp eyes, some mocking, others curious, a few unsettled. He breathed once, steady, and began. On Earth, we told the tale of Prometheus. He stole fire from gods to give it to mortals. For that crime, he was chained to rock, his liver devoured every day by an eagle. Many of you laugh, gods, theft, punishment. But the truth was simpler. Humanity learned to take fire, though nature punished us for it. We survived cold nights. We cooked food, warded off predators, and burned our enemies when we had no claws. The punishment? The danger of fire itself, burn, smoke, destruction. The story was a warning. Power is never free. Every gift comes with pain. That is what we taught children, generation after generation. Learn the fire, or be consumed by it. The crystalline cadet, his body glittering with refracted light, rumbled in disapproval. A story of theft dressed as wisdom. Why not simply record that lesson? Elias turned his scarred face toward him. Because instructions are forgotten. Stories are remembered. Even the simplest child remembers Prometheus. And in that memory lives the truth. Never trust power without consequence. The hall quieted. He could feel their disbelief fray into thought. He stepped toward the hologram still lingering of Thermopylae. The small band of human warriors gleamed against impossible odds. His voice hardened. Then there was Thermopylae. 300 men faced an army of thousands. Do you understand? They knew they would die. They stood anyway. Why? Not because victory was possible, but because they chose to hold the line. They slowed the enemy long enough for their people to prepare. Every human child knows this story, not as fantasy, but as instruction. There are moments when you will not live, but you must still fight, because your death buys time for others. Our myths taught us that sacrifice can be victory. A cadet of molten stone shifted, molten light flickering in cracks along his arms. To glorify death is folly. Elias's eyes cut to him. Not to glorify, to teach. Every human soldier who falls buys someone else a chance. We do not worship death. We weaponize it. The molten cadet lowered his gaze. General Catharn's lips peeled back in a slow, dangerous grin. Clever words. But I fought in campaigns before your kind could leave its cradle. You think endurance makes you unique? Every species has endured. Every species has bled. Why then do your stories matter more than records of fact? Elias felt the tension sharpen. He drew a slow breath, eyes fixed on the towering general. Because facts fade in memory. Data dies with archives. But stories endure even when written in nothing but breath. We carried them through famine, plague, and fire. Our ancestors whispered them in caves when ash covered the sky. Stories survived when nothing else did, and so did we. The chamber grew quiet again. The cadets caught between defiance and a dawning unease. Elias's tone shifted, lower, heavier. I was at Cordoon. Many of you know that siege. You call it a victory of strategy, numbers, attrition. But do you know what it was to live it? Weeks trapped in tunnels cut off from resupply. No food, no air. The Voidborn hunted us night and day. Do you know what kept us alive? He pointed to the hologram of Thermopylae. This, the story. We knew others had stood where death was certain, and they had not broken. We whispered it in the dark when fear pressed on our throats. Hold the pass, buy time, stand until you fall. We lived that story until relief came. Without it, we would have broken. I would not be here. He tugged the collar of his uniform down, revealing a jagged scar running over his ribs. This scar was the price. Myths did not spare me. They taught me how to keep standing after pain. They remind us, courage is not absence of fear. Courage is walking into it. The amphitheater was silent, the cadets watching him with raw attention. Then the avian cadet spoke, voice sharp but shaken. If what you say is true, then every story is but a rehearsal for death. Why does your kind cling to that instead of strength? Elias stepped closer, his eyes cold. Because strength fails. Claws dull, armor cracks, fire sputters out. But the will to rise again? That is a weapon no enemy can shatter. Our myths forged that will. That is why we tell them still. General Catharn tilted his head, studying Elias like prey that had bitten back. You speak with conviction. Yet conviction is not proof. Words are air. Elias met his gaze without flinching. So are orders. Yet soldiers die for them. A ripple passed through the chamber. The cadets shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between the general and the human. The silence stretched until even the hum of the station seemed to vanish. Finally, Catharn leaned forward, claws flexing against the floor. You claim myths are weapons, that they carve strength into fragile flesh. Then prove it, human. Prove it beyond words. Elias's voice was quiet, but unwavering. I will. And when the time comes, you will see why our stories are not lies, but warnings etched in blood. At that moment, the amphitheater shuddered. A low alarm blared through the walls. Lights shifted from red to pulsing crimson. The cadets stiffened, feathers rising, crystals glowing, scales hardening. General Catharn snapped his head toward the command console as reports streamed across the holo display. The words fell like ice across the chamber. Voidborn incursion. Breach in Sector 9. The cadets erupted in chaos. Shouts, fear, confusion. Alien discipline fractured under sudden threat. Elias did not move. His scarred hands tightened into fists. He had seen this before, the panic, the shattering of order. His eyes burned with grim certainty. The myths he had spoken of, the truths they had mocked, were no longer stories. They were about to become reality. The klaxons roared through the Citadel of War. Crimson lights pulsed like a heartbeat of dread. Cadets stumbled to their feet, shouting in a dozen tongues, their discipline dissolving into panic. General Catharn bellowed above the noise, his voice cracking the air. "Form ranks! Sector 9 is breached. Prepare for combat." But the cadets were untested. Some froze, others argued, feathers flaring, crystals humming, mandibles snapping. The Voidborn's reputation was legend across the Accord, predators from beyond the stars, more shadow than flesh, breaking armies like brittle glass. Elias Veyra did not wait. He moved with grim precision, striding toward the exit where alarms flashed. His voice cut through the chaos, steady and sharp. "You want to know if our myths are real? Follow me and you'll learn." A handful of cadets hesitated, then fell in behind him. The others, torn between fear and pride, trickled after until the human led a mismatched formation down the corridor. The bulkheads trembled with distant impacts. The sound was not explosions, but something worse. Tearing, feeding, the hollow resonance of predators gnawing through steel. They reached the junction above Sector 9. Smoke choked the air. The corridor beyond was dark, emergency strobes flickering over clawed rents in the walls. Shapes emerged. The Voidborn were wrong to the eye, their forms shifting with oily translucence, edged with talons and jaws that glimmered with void light. They moved like liquid shadows, every step a ripple of nightmare. Cadets recoiled. One whispered, "They are impossible." Elias drew the combat knife from his belt, the steel plane, unadorned, worn from use. His pistol followed, its power cell half drained. His stance was calm, scarred face lit by the red warning strobes. "No," he said. "They're just enemies. And enemies bleed." The first Voidborn surged forward, talons sweeping wide. Elias fired point blank, the bolt searing through its skull. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, then collapsed into smoke. The cadets froze, stunned. Elias didn't. He grabbed the molten stone cadet by the shoulder and shoved him forward. "Block the passage. You're the wall." The crystalline cadet hesitated until Elias barked, "Shatter their sightlines! Shine!" The being flared with blinding refractions, scattering void light across the hall, forcing the predators to recoil. Orders flowed like water from Elias's lips, fast and decisive. "Avian, take the high rail. Strike from above." Insectoid, flank the left. "Don't fight alone. Fight as one." The cadets obeyed. For the first time, their myths and pride meant nothing. What mattered was survival. The Voidborn crashed against them. Talons screeched on molten armor. Jaws snapped at crystalline limbs. Elias moved within the chaos like a blade through smoke, pistol spitting bolts, knife slashing where shadows thickened. Every strike was brutal, efficient, nothing wasted. One cadet screamed as claws pierced his side. Elias was there in an instant, driving his knife into the Voidborn's throat, dragging the wounded soldier back. "Hold the line," Elias roared. "Remember Thermopylae. Make them pay for every step." The words cut through fear. The cadets braced, shoulders pressed, holding against the tide. The molten cadet blocked the corridor, chest blazing. The crystalline warrior's light dazzled the shadows. The avian dove from above, talons striking eyes. The insectoid slashed at tendons with precise fury. Together, they held. But the Voidborn were endless. From the darkness came an alpha. Larger than the rest, its form armored in black void plate, its maw splitting open to reveal rows of fanged maws within maws. The corridor shook as it stepped forward, eyes glowing with hunger. Cadets faltered. General Catharn arrived at last, his massive frame filling the corridor. His plasma halberd ignited, scorching blue. He snarled, "Hold, cadets, with me!" But even the general's presence could not mask their fear. The Alpha Voidborn lunged. Elias did not wait for command. He threw himself at the monster, rolling beneath its claws, driving his blade into its leg joint. Black ichor hissed across his arm. The Alpha howled, flinging him against the wall. His ribs cracked. Pain lanced through his body, but he rose again, staggering. The cadets stared in disbelief. General Catharn growled, "You're mad, human!" Elias spat blood, gripping his knife tighter. "No, I'm human," the Alpha surged again. Elias feinted left, then dove under its guard, slashing across its throat. The blade skittered, leaving only shallow wounds. Its jaws opened, ready to swallow him whole. "Now!" Elias bellowed. The crystalline cadet flared, blinding light striking the beast's eyes. The molten cadet drove his burning fist into its chest. The avian raked its wings across its face. The insectoid pierced its flank with serrated claws. Elias leapt, climbing its back like a wolf clambering a titan. He drove his knife again and again into the pulsing void flesh at its nape. The alpha shrieked, convulsed, then collapsed, its body dissolving into black smoke. Silence followed. The cadets stood trembling, staring at the fallen horror. Smoke curled around Elias, who knelt on the dissolving carcass, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds. He wiped his blade on his sleeve, then sheathed it. "That," he rasped, voice raw, "is why we tell stories." General Catharn approached, his golden eyes narrowed, his grin gone. He looked down at Elias as if seeing him for the first time. "You fought like a lunatic," Catharn said. "You should be dead." Elias's reply was cold steel. "So should we all. But we're not. That's the lesson. Stand, even when death is certain. Hold the line. Fight anyway." The cadets exchanged glances. No one laughed now. Their myths had been ripped apart by fear, then reforged in battle. They had lived the truth. Stories were not fantasy. They were blueprints. General Catharn lowered his halberd. "Perhaps your myths are not lies." "Perhaps they are." "Instructions, as you say." Elias pushed himself to his feet, wincing but unbroken. His eyes burned with the same fire as the myths he carried. "They are more than instructions, General." The Citadel's corridors smelled of scorched metal and blood. Smoke drifted in thin veils, clinging to the air as emergency crews sealed ruptures and dragged carcasses of Voidborn that hadn't fully dissolved. The klaxons had gone silent, but their echo seemed carved into the station's bones. Captain Elias Veyra walked with slow, deliberate steps, his ribs aching with every breath. A medic tried to force him toward the infirmary, but he waved the attempt away. "Later. Others first." His voice was gravel, but firm. Cadets who had stood with him moved in silence. Their feathers drooped, crystalline forms dimmed, molten cracks flickered faintly, mandibles clicked without rhythm. They were alive, but the weight of what they had seen pressed on them heavier than any armor. General Catharn led the procession, his massive frame casting long shadows against the red-lit walls. When they reached the central chamber, he turned sharply, his golden eyes locking on Elias. "Captain Veyra," Catharn growled. "What happened in that corridor should have ended in massacre. Yet you held, with untested recruits. Explain." Elias's scarred face was calm, though exhaustion bled through his stance. "I didn't hold, we did. I reminded them how." Catharn's eyes narrowed. "With your stories?" "Yes," Elias answered without hesitation. "With stories that became flesh. They saw what sacrifice means. They understood endurance is more than word. It's action." A ripple of unease spread among the cadets at the memory. The crystalline warrior spoke softly, his voice like glass chimes. "I remembered Prometheus. Power with consequence. My light nearly burned me out, but I held it longer because of that tale." The molten cadet added, low and steady, "And I remembered your words at Thermopylae. Make them pay for every step." I blocked the corridor because I believed it. Others nodded. Even the avian, once mocking, admitted, "When I struck from above, I thought of your hunters who fought beasts larger than themselves. I thought, if they could, then so could I." Their voices trembled, but there was no ridicule left. General Catharn studied them in silence, his claws tapping once against the floor. "Perhaps," he admitted. "There is strength in this madness of yours. Yet myths are dangerous. They breed arrogance, delusion." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "Only if you mistake them for prophecy. They are not promises. They are reminders. They tell us you can stand, even when you think you cannot. That is not arrogance. It is survival." Catharn tilted his head, scales catching the dim light. "And you believe this is humanity's gift to the Accord?" Elias answered quietly. Yes, you have weapons beyond our reach, ships faster than we ever dreamed. But when the Voidborn come, and they will come again, you will need more than weapons. You'll need will. That is what we bring. The hall stilled. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Catharn's lips peeled back, not in mockery, but something close to respect. Perhaps you are right, human. Perhaps your myths carry iron. Elias exhaled slowly, his body heavy with pain. He wanted nothing more than a bed, but the cadet's eyes anchored him. They weren't looking at a broken veteran now. They were looking at proof. One of the younger cadets stepped forward, trembling slightly. Her crystalline body reflected the faint glow of emergency lights. "Tell us another," she asked, voice almost pleading. "Another myth." "Not later, now." The request caught him off guard. He searched their faces and saw it. Fear still lived there, but so did hunger. They wanted something to hold on to. Elias leaned against the bulkhead, his breath shallow. He began softly. There was a man named Odysseus. He fought a war far from home, and when it ended, he journeyed back. It should have been simple, but it was not. He faced storms, monsters, temptations. He lost ships, friends, nearly his mind. Yet through it all, he never stopped walking toward home. 10 years he fought to return. And when he did, though he was weary, he stood and reclaimed what was his. The avian cadet tilted his head. "And the lesson?" "That endurance is not only for the battlefield," Elias said. "It is for life. You will be tested again and again. Sometimes the enemy is not before you, but time itself. Keep walking. Do not stop." That is what Odysseus teaches. The molten cadet's molten veins glowed brighter. The crystalline cadet's dim light grew steadier. Even the insectoid, quiet and severe, clicked mandibles in approval. General Catharn snorted. "You have the meeting from your hand, human." Elias gave a faint, tired smile. "Not eating. Learning. That's the difference." Catharn studied him a long moment, then turned away. "Rest. You've bled enough for one day. But know this. Your words have made you enemies as well as allies. There are those in the Accord who do not want humans raised higher than they deserve. Be ready." "I always am," Elias replied, his voice steady despite the ache in his ribs. As the general strode off, the cadets lingered, clustering near Elias. Their eyes no longer held mockery. Some carried awe, others confusion, but all bore respect. The crystalline cadet spoke again, hesitant. "Do you believe we could make myths of our own? Not just retell yours, but forge stories in battle that will guide others?" Elias's eyes softened. "That is how every myth begins, with someone who refuses to break. You saw what happened today. Remember it. Speak of it. One day someone will whisper your names in the dark to give courage. That's how stories live. That's how we do." A hush fell. For the first time, the cadet seemed to grasp the weight of what he had offered. Not lies, not fantasies, but inheritance. Elias finally allowed the medic to guide him toward the infirmary. Pain burned with every step, but beneath it was something else. Pride, sharp and unyielding. Not for himself, but for those who had fought